Hello and welcome to Fire of Learning. This is the fourth and final Myers-Briggs type analysis video. In this video we're going to be talking about the least common category, the NTs, the intuitive thinkers, the ENTP, the INTP, the INTJ, and the ENTJ. Now, just like the NFs we talked about in the last video, NTPs and NTJs may on the surface look fairly similar, but deep down the circuitry is fairly different, and while they may share a considerable amount of similarities, they may be fairly different people. We'll elaborate on the differences when we get into the cognitive functions in just a couple minutes here, but for now, what basic similarities do these types share that allow them to be categorized in the same category? Well, like all Ns, NTs are highly attracted to abstract concepts, new possibilities, and big ideas. They think outside the box very well. They may have complex personalities. They may trust their gut feeling over what their immediate senses are telling them, and they're particularly good at reading between the lines of things. When confronted with new information, an NT will attempt to formulate the big picture first and then work out the components, as opposed to S's who do the opposite. And like all Ts, NTs have a preference for making decisions based on objective criteria and their own logical conclusions, and will seek to exhibit this decision-making style accordingly, particularly in situations which a thinking function attracts them to, such as the organization of the external world or the search for precision and truth. NTs are usually bright, rational, level-headed, independent, and enthusiastic people, having an interest in, and in fact making hobbies out of, subjects which they're fascinated in, such as science, math, history, philosophy, etc., may make them appear somewhat geeky or nerdy on the surface, especially as they may favor participation in these subjects over social interaction at times, even in extroverts. Though they, namely introverts, may appear awkward or isolated at times, they do tend to value human relationships, though because of their weaker feeling functions, not always expressed very well. However, when it is expressed, NTs may display it in being gregarious with people they like, being open to discussing a wide variety of subjects. As mentioned, NTs have a preference for making decisions, understanding concepts, and living out their lives in accordance with what makes sense to them, and they may tend to view emotions as something which gets in the way of this, especially their own. Accordingly, if they can be shown that they are wrong, they will often attempt to not take it personally. However, if they believe that their logical conclusions are being criticized or challenged, especially unnecessarily, not only will they be quick to debate, but they will often be very challenging debaters, viewing it as an opportunity to test and refine their own beliefs, utilize their problem-solving skills, and accordingly often enjoy the process of debate, so long as it does not lead to bitter argument. This is not to say that they are unpleasant people, however. NTs are usually laid back, flexible, and likable in environments in which they are not stressed. They may be witty, comical, or attempt to be entertaining. Sometimes this entertaining side isn't as funny to other types, as it often involves pranks or humor, which is intentionally confusing. However, in being a very independent type, they are generally proud of their own originality, very concerned about their free time, may be very private and welcoming of orders or manipulation, and may react to affronts not only by argumentation, but by leaving a situation entirely. Likewise, they are generally more respectful of people's independence, more so NTPs than NTJs, honestly, but we'll discuss that in a moment. However, on the negative side, when stressed or unhealthy, NTs may become argumentative, cold, defensive, isolated, caustic, and irritable. At times, if their reasoning makes sense in their own heads, they may be unwelcoming of criticism or challenges to their decisions. They may try to ignore emotions in their decision-making process, including their own. When others' emotions are concerned, they may take great offense to this neglect, and furthermore, when there are misunderstandings between an NT and another person, they may expect the other person to come to bridge the gap. They may also be considerably suspicious of others and antisocial, which may offend strangers and discourage people close to them. Considering their own emotions, neglecting them can lead to stress, and when a problem cannot be solved by what normally makes sense to them, they may shut down entirely where other types would collect themselves. Like all intuitive types, they may have difficulty focusing on practical tasks such as house or car maintenance or finances, NTPs especially. While spending considerable amounts of time in their own heads may have its benefits, it may be very stressful for them as these tasks go undone and life outside passes by. Furthermore, while they may indeed be very original and fairly bright, their thinking habits and choices may make them appear to others to be egotistical or arrogant, or worse, can lead to actual egoism and arrogance, assuming that people who think differently or are overall different are simply not intelligent or worthwhile. However, most NTs do not exhibit these traits commonly, especially in the extreme, and, as mentioned, are generally easygoing and likable. Their systematic abstract thinking style, desire for achievement and originality, and wide range of interests often winds up in fields such as sciences, philosophy, politics, and economics, engineering, etc. And many notable figures within these fields we will see have been NTs throughout history. So that's a sufficient introductory description. However, to continue, we have to establish the differences between the NTJs and the NTPs, and to do that, we will of course have to look at the cognitive functions, and like the NFJs and NFPs in the last video, like I said, NTJs and NTPs do not share any cognitive functions. So here are the four types again: the INTJ, the ENTJ, the INTP, and the ENTP. and here are their cognitive functions. So they're all NTs because their lead functions are both intuition and thinking. However, as you can see here, they're opposite focuses. NTJs prefer extroverted thinking and introverted intuition, and NTPs prefer introverted thinking and extroverted intuition. Likewise, their inferior functions as well are opposites. NTJs are introverted feelers and extroverted sensors, and NTPs are introverted sensors and extroverted feelers. So on the surface, these two types may act very similarly and may have similar interests and hobbies, etc., but deep down, their circuitry is a little bit different. What's the difference? Well, let's get into it, starting with intuition. NTJs prefer, as I said, NI, introverted intuition, and NTPs prefer extroverted intuition, NE. Now we explained the same difference in the NFJs and NFPs in the last video, but we'll do it again here because the intuition, in combination with the thinking function, which these types prefer, comes out a little bit differently. Both intuition functions are, of course, functions focused on ideas and concepts and possibilities, but NI functions more on connecting concepts to fit a larger point. It connects ideas as branches into a single tree, I suppose you could say, whereas NE is more like a focus on a wide variety of ideas and concepts, both to create and understand. So NTJs are going to spend a lot of time trying to tie together what they perceive to be true in their heads, and will generally place quite a bit of focus on the subjects which they're interested in. They may just intuitively understand things and see patterns in things which may go unnoticed to others. It may have moments where it's described as a sort of eureka type moment where things finally come together and understand things, and you can almost see it in their eyes when they've pieced something together like that. And while NI explores a variety of concepts, generally this focus will leave them somewhat less interested in unrelated concepts, and they may be in fact somewhat critical of useless information. This is what leads NTJs to be fairly independent thinkers, because they may be equally critical of authority-backed information, such as schoolwork, which other types are more responsive to. NTs in general, as a matter of fact, are classic examples of the old, the teacher says I'm smart but lazy type kids. And generally teachers actually do mean this with NTs, but with reference to NTJs, NTJs usually can function fairly well in a very regimented and systematic environment. They just don't want to do that with school because they see it as outside of their goals for their life and their style of thinking. This function complements their thinking function, extroverted thinking, TE, which ENTJs lead with and INTJs follow with very well. TE is a function focused on an efficient and logical organization of the external world. NTPs, which we'll discuss here in a moment with their TI and NE, may spend copious amounts of time contemplating subjects more in depth, but TE is more focused on utilizing information and making it applicable to real-world settings, and, as I said, their NI function is going to be consistently reviewing information and enticing them to explore hunches and filtering out unnecessary ideas and such. This, accordingly, draws them to sciences and philosophy and politics and such things. A great number of contributors to these fields are NTJs, as they're exceptionally skilled with putting things together and making them work in the real world, with abstract topics especially, but also, of course, in business, the military, or other organizations, even in the household and with friends and such. They're good with graphs, charts, and means of organizing data like that. They're more concerned with being effective than precise, and even though they may themselves be very independent and would prefer that others be independent, they generally do well in positions of command. This is why NTJs do so well in somewhat high-stress, mentally challenging environments. If you look and see, ENTJs in particular have the highest average income in the US, and a great number of not only modern CEOs and such, but, in fact, famous military leaders throughout history, Napoleon, Caesar, Alexander, Genghis Khan, etc., were ENTJs, and this is evident. Employing TE, these four were all men who got right into the thick of battle and maintained a cool head and were quickly capable of figuring out what needed to be done to win and executing that plan, whether actual combat or on the political scene or something like that. Looking at NI, each of these leaders were independent thinkers with grand designs. This is again evident on the battlefield. Each of these men had tactics which were unique or revolutionary for their times, in fact, but also in the design of their empires. They weren't just going to sit back and be the dutiful SJ general who just does what needs to be done, goes through with their service. No, they took over their governments, united their nations, conquered major empires, etc., things like that. INTJs are definitely noticeable on the scene as well, even if they're not so bold as their extroverted counterparts at times. In terms of a country like Vladimir Lenin, or in terms of a major company or something like Elon Musk. Elon Musk is another good example. He's likely less interested in studying the intricacies of human civilization and its effects on the world past what is necessary, and more interested in building things which will have an impact on remodeling the world and directing his subordinates to follow through. E in NTPs, however, is more concerned, as I said, with a variety of ideas and new possibilities. Extroverted intuitors like NTPs are constantly on the lookout for new ideas. They may become very interested in new concepts, and naturally, they're very good at comprehending them quickly and, in fact, improving on them. This focus on new, intriguing concepts can make them seem like they jump from topic to topic, and this is certainly somewhat true, where an NTJ may focus on one thing, like economics or the military or something like that, for an extended time. It might be astronomy one week, maybe even for a couple of days, then history for a bit and another language, probably juggling a whole bunch of concepts at once and then coming back to them at different times, for an NTP. It's not that they have a short attention span, they're just comfortable juggling multiple subjects at once, and in fact, they tend to prefer that. Accordingly, NTPs can be somewhat bothered by routine or unstimulating monotony or practical tasks. They may not only be capable or even above average skill at doing something like their math homework, but maybe putting a bunch of numbers through systems isn't as interesting as what they have decided to do with their time. And that's not necessarily always that they have a preference for doing some glorious big picture contemplation over the menial tasks and tribulations of the average life. It's admittedly sometimes that they're just more interested in a video game over housework. But obviously, who hasn't found themselves in that situation before? But NTPs especially may have to learn how to come back down to earth a little bit more than they'd like to. And of course, NTPs prefer TI, introverted thinking. TI is concerned with systematizing the world logically and impartially and consistently refining itself in order to perfect the understanding of the world. Accordingly, TI leads, like NTPs, are very interested in systems and are very quick to contemplate the components of something and decipher its core or solve an issue. TI leads are also very precise and seek to convey ideas without confusion. STPs generally will do this by being more laconic, as I said in a previous video, but NTPs are not afraid to use a large vocabulary and will generally have little patience for people who believe their vocabulary usage is used to unnecessarily fluff a statement. Furthermore, NTPs will have little patience or care for people who don't understand their interest or flat out ignore their reasoning in general. NTJs are like this as well, but NTPs usually communicate things by pulling from their TI framework, and if it's a complex matter, the NTP may not express it very well, even though it makes perfect sense to them in their heads and may simply choose to forego explaining the reasoning if they feel that others will not respect it anyway, which is something that NTPs generally have to work on. TI is essentially what makes NTPs aspire to be, though are certainly not always successful at being, a Spock-type character. Making decisions based on logic, contemplating various concepts, disregarding irrelevant emotions, etc. Combined with intuition, NTPs generally have a preference for exploring various intriguing concepts and ideas as opposed to their STP counterparts who prefer to explore the systems of the practical world. Accordingly, an NTP will spend a lot of time in his or her head as their minds are constantly generating ideas, and TI leads them to review them and will lead them to hold internal debates about their logical consistency and likelihood and things such as that. An INTP especially may be one of the most introverted people you know because they spend a lot of time in their heads, and although all intuitive types can sometimes feel like the real world is interrupting their inner world, NTPs may have the greatest preference for living in their internal world because of these functions. However, as a result of this, they may be satisfied with an idea making sense in their heads once all of its aspects have been understood and not necessarily as focused as reproducing it in the real world as an NTJ might be. A perfect example of an NTP is Leonardo da Vinci, an ENTP, so therefore of course an NE lead. He, an NE lead, was immensely interested in new ideas and concepts and filled notebook upon notebook with his own. In the 15th century, a little over 500 years ago, he created flying machines, submarines, tanks, discovered heart disease, etc. He was a busy, creative, and logical dude. And though not many NTPs share da Vinci's IQ, estimated to be over 200, this ability to comprehend subjects and uncover their internal meaning is linked to why the NTP types have the highest IQ average. However, many of his inventions were never actually constructed, partially because of some unfortunate incidents in his life, but also partially because it was sufficient to him to know it would work. Another example of the difference between an NTJ and an NTP is Tesla and Einstein. Tesla, an INTJ, was interested in building things and inventing things and restructuring the external world. Einstein figured out a lot of things which are certainly profound but were more abstract and involved contemplation, and restructured the external world on a more intellectual level. And now the inferior functions. NTJs prefer introverted feeling, FI, and NTPs prefer extroverted feeling, FE. FI, as we have discussed, is a function dedicated towards systematizing a set of principles and values which the person feels that they must connect to in order to feel truly like themselves. Accordingly, though it is not a dominant trait, NTJs may at times make decisions and reinforce their reasoning with morals and values, and will have a somewhat better understanding of their emotions and focus on what is right. When they feel that they are right, FI is what causes them to be very adamant about it, and can make them seem stubborn. However, their ability to use FI is of course not as developed as their NFP or SFP counterparts, and as the weaker function, NTJs may feel at times that they don't know who they are deep down and may commit some of their time trying to figure it out. NTPs prefer FE, extroverted feeling. FE is what stops NTPs from being as harsh about their reasoning as NTJs, though it may make them seem somewhat awkward or socially anxious. Like all extroverted feelers, NTPs have a concern for how other people feel, and how others feel may directly impact their own emotions, but may feel awkward in trying to accommodate others' feelings because of the weakness of the function, lacking the natural know-how that their NFJ and SFJ counterparts have. Though group harmony is important to them, if the feeling of others gets in the way of their logical conclusions, they will generally prefer their own reasoning to group emotion and harmony. And as their feeling is a weaker function and is extroverted, they may have more difficulty dealing with their own emotions and may display them seemingly awkwardly or inappropriately, especially while under stress. However, they will display it healthily while conversing with friends or at times in expressing an emotional connection to the outer world and their place within it through poetry or similar things. And last but not least, NTPs prefer SI, introverted sensing, and NTJs prefer SE, extroverted sensing. SI, the very first function we talked about in this series, is dedicated to categorization of facts and details about the immediate sensory world. It works fairly interesting in NTPs as they use it to reinforce the functioning of TI and NE, drawing on things which they've experienced or learned and analyzing the trial and error mentality evolved with SI. However, as this function is introverted, NTPs may be less interested in being involved with the external world, which complements their desire to live inside of their heads fairly well. NTJs prefer SE, extroverted sensing, so they may be somewhat more athletic, may be more aware of trends and such, may dress better, and may have more of an appreciation for the external world and living in the moment, and, accordingly, participating in the external world, which complements NI and TV very well, as they may impulsively and without hesitation jump right into their plans or projects and maintain a cool head within such situations. So, in conclusion, NTs are rational, bright, independent-minded, enthusiastic, creative, and laid-back people. They enjoy learning about a variety of systems, have a knack for solving problems logically and reading in between the lines, and are usually proud of their originality and independence. However, they may have difficulty with others' insight, which are contradictory to what makes sense to them, especially where emotions are concerned, and NTs may have to learn to adjust their rationale to fit values and ideal human relations, taking into account the emotions of others and learning to manage their own. NTs who improve themselves on these drawbacks and capitalize on their talents have a full potential to make a big difference in the world. Now for some NT statistics. NTs constitute 10.3% of the US population. The INTP makes up 3.3%, the ENTP makes up 3.2%, the INTJ makes up 2.1%, and the ENTJ makes up 1.8%. Famous INTPs include Abraham Lincoln, Charles Darwin, Karl Marx, Marie Curie, and Tina Fey, and also myself. Not that I'm necessarily famous, but anyway. Famous ENTPs include Benjamin Franklin, Richard Feynman, Socrates, John Cleese, and Stephen Fry. Famous INTJs include Isaac Newton, Ayn Rand, Friedrich Nietzsche, Mark Zuckerberg, and Patrick Stewart. And famous ENTJs include Aristotle, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Bill Gates, and Alexander Hamilton. Well, that's the NTs in a nutshell, and we have now covered all 16 types in a decent amount of depth, as well as, of course, videos explaining the cognitive functions and the MBTI letters. But one big topic remains, and it's kind of the elephant in the room. How accurate, consistent, applicable, and scientific is all of this stuff? A lot of people are concerned that it's just the next astrology. Some people think that it's maybe nice to know, but ultimately useless. So, in the next video, we'll be exploring the validity of Myers-Briggs type personalities and addressing counter-arguments, so stay tuned, and for more videos on subjects like this and a wide variety of other ones, be sure to check out Fire Learning and subscribe. Thank you for watching.